Hi, Shauna. This is Shauna from Rockwall. Let's start that over. That's a tongue twister.
I know it is.
Rockwall Winery. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna have to get better at that. So welcome, Shauna from Winery. As we established, that's a tongue twister. But it's so great to have you on, and we are super excited to talk to you about your wine and your process and how you go about making all these amazing wines from all these different grapes.
Totally. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I love Morgan and Tyler and every project they've ever done. So
Likewise, big fan. So let's just dive right in because maybe some of our viewers know, maybe they don't, but you come from this like lineage of winemakers. Your father was a big name in the wine industry and sort of was a major pioneer in California wines. And he started Rosenblum Cellars, and then you started Rockwall with him and your uncle. So you have this long, kind of connection with the wine industry. Can you talk about that, like as you were growing up and how that became a part of your family and your life?
Yeah, definitely. My dad always thinks it's important that we have wine in our glass. So I'm going to open some wine first.
Well, it's very convenient. I am also drinking a glass. So
good girl. I'm gonna bust open some sparkling rosé. I brought two different rosés. Both are made from the same base of Grenache and Counois. But so yeah, growing up in a wine family. Growing up, I literally I thought, woo,
best sound in the world.
Yeah, I was not trying to be quiet there. I can be, but I was not trying to be quiet there. For all the Psalms out there judging me.
No.
So yeah, being raised in a wine family, I literally thought that that's just what people did. Like kids went to school and parents made wine. Like that's what I thought everybody did. Like my Girl Scout troop would go down and stomp grapes at the winery. I started on the bottling line at the age of 12. I was like this weird, like passionate little kid who was just like, I would like break a sweat. I was so serious about it. And I grew up in the winery, learning about the whole process from my dad and his assistant winemakers. And when I was a teenager, they let me start sitting in on blends with them. And it was an all-male winemaking team, but I learned a lot from the way that they would talk and describe wine. But I also realized that the way that they were smelling wine and the things they were smelling in wine were different than what I was smelling in wine. Like they would say, oh, it has a berry note. And I'd say, oh yeah, like slightly underripe strawberry, or, like I would get a little bit more specific where they were using more like overarching terms. I don't know what that means or anything. It just, it was just an observation that I made, that I would go a little bit deeper into what that smell or what that taste was.
And this was when you were like a fairly young person, a teenager.
Yeah, like 15 or 16 for sure.
Wow, that's a super sophisticated palate for someone that age. But I guess if you grow up around it, then it's sort of just in the ether, huh?
Yeah, indeed. And I think that's really well said. Like growing up, my dad always said he had a sense of smell he never knew was good for anything. And I definitely inherited that. But yeah, that was when I was a teenager. And then I'm very passionate about art. I always have been. That's what I wanted to do. So I got a scholarship to California College of Arts and Crafts, did my undergraduate in ceramics, went on to San Francisco Art Institute and did my master's degree in sculpture and theory, which was more like a degree in French philosophy instead of making things. But it definitely informed my process. And during that entire time, I always worked at the winery. And I took a class called Clay and Glaze Technology. And so some people don't know that in order to be a ceramics major, you have to take a bunch of units of chemistry, because you have to know like what chemicals will blow up the building if you heat them to 3,000 degrees, etc. It's the important stuff.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So during that time, I was doing my little clay and glaze experiment. So I had made a base glaze, and I had my little 16 cups of base glaze and my triple beam and my goggles, and I'm weighing out little additions to each cup. And I'm like, I had this literal light bulb moment. I'm like, I already know how to do this. This is exactly like the process of blending wine. And it was at that moment that I realized that winemaking was art. That had not been my perspective before. My perspective was that it was this dirty, smelly, funky thing that my family always did. But then as soon as I realized it was fine art, I was like, oh shit, my dad's an artist. Like it flipped it for me.
Oh my gosh, that I have goosebumps all over because it's funny. My father was a dentist and still is a dentist, and I always thought, oh, he's a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
But then as he retired and he started to get like really into doing sculpture on his own for his own pleasure and his was good, I was like, oh, my dad's always been an artist. He was just making teeth instead of paint. So that's a really interesting correlation to be like, oh, this person that I thought was one thing is now like a crazy artist, and I can totally get behind that.
Yeah, it flipped the perspective for me. And, like I said, I always worked at the winery, but I went back to the winery like, okay, I know we do this, but why? Why do we hook this to this? Why do we do this, etc.? And so it gave me a whole new passion. And then I was teaching art in the city of Oakland. I taught for a long time as an assistant teacher, and then as a teacher. It was about 12 years from the time when I started as an undergrad to the time when I finished teaching. And so 2008, my parents sold Rosenblum Cellars, and the same year we came over here and started Rockwall. And my master's degree, the last show that I did, it was all about women as containers. And so as soon as I got here and saw, I'm going to take us for a walk for a second. And so as soon as the light's much better that way. As soon as I got here and started seeing all of these tanks, I couldn't help myself, right? So here's Beyonce.
Oh my God, I love this so much.
We've got Aisha Curry, Lena Dunham, Mindy Kaling, and then my fictional heroines are over here in this bank of tanks. So these are my little sisters, Arya and Sansa.
Oh my gosh, so great.
Yeah, and then last but certainly not least, Katniss and Primrose.
Yeah. So this is so amazing because like we all know, and because we've had some other wine and spirits makers on to our happy hour who are also, women. We're trying to really spotlight women in the industry because there have historically been very few. But so we're so excited to introduce more women into this, into the awareness, so that people know that this isn't only for men. And it's so cool to watch you bringing your energy as a woman and as a creative person to even like the very containers that are holding your wine. That's so cool.
Thank you. And it was just, I don't know, like to me, like females, that's just something that nature gave us. Like we are containers, whether we want to be or not. Like we can make a human life in our body. Like that's insane. And yeah, there were not, I mean, when I started at Rockwall, I think female winemakers, I think we comprised, it was 5% of the entire industry. A heartening statistic, I think we now comprise about 10%.
Well, 100% improvement is good, but
still a ways to go for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and with any career like that, you're gonna encounter derogatory dudes who don't understand or don't want to interact with women or don't feel comfortable or whatever it is. But you're also gonna find really phenomenal men who are supportive, the good guys, right? The good guys. And so it's important to find your allies and make sure that you have those. But yeah, it's definitely crazy being a female in the wine industry. It's better now. It feels like way more normal now. In 2008, it was like, oh, honey, you're a winemaker? That's cute.
Yeah.
Like, ew, stop.
That's the worst. But that is something I am hearing too from the other guests that we've interviewed is like, yes, it puts you initially at a disadvantage, but then there's also that energy that comes behind you from all the people who have been waiting for somebody to support and represent them in the industry. So hopefully you're feeling that.
Oh, I definitely am. And I've, I've heard some extremely inspiring things from so many different women throughout the industry who are like, I've been watching your career, since the beginning, and thank you for always being loud and outspoken and just doing whatever you want to do and what you think is right. And I guess that's just who I am. That's sort of how I operate. If I think something, you will probably know it because I will probably tell you. But yeah, it's definitely crazy being a woman in the wine industry. But we're here, and like you said, there's been a whole revolution of young women who are like, hey, I can make wine, I can ferment things, like this isn't just for dudes.
Right. Well, and I think that there's something to that, what you were saying earlier about that it is an art form and that it's inherently creative, that is, very attractive. I mean, to speak generally, but to women are very drawn to those types of pursuits, where it's like, let me blend, let me look at the nuance, let me kind of be in this experience. So I think that we have an advantage in that way. And maybe that was your advantage growing up with tasting the different things that your dad and his friends weren't tasting.
Yeah, good point. And I think to that point, like I got to meet Marguerite Mondavi one time, and she was a female in the wine industry back in the 1960s. Like, dude, I can't even imagine like what she's seen some shit, right? Like, but she told me, she's like, I would be leading tours through the caves in the 1960s and someone would say something rude or inappropriate. And she'd say, oh, well, women, we've been cooking your food for thousands of years. We have better palates than you do. And just look at them. And I'm like, that's an interesting point, I mean, historically, like a lot of the domestic things like cooking were left up to women. And frankly, so maybe like as an evolutionary thing, like women just developed really sensitive palates. So their people didn't starve.
Right. Well, and also, like you were saying, women are containers. We're designed to create life. Like we have to be very discerning into what goes into our bodies for that very purpose in sort of a primal way. So
I love that. Oh, I think that's great. That's great.
Well, I'm so like jazzed up about the female energy in your winery. So your winery here, you're not like out in rolling fields of vineyards. You're in the city pretty much, right? This is an urban situation. Can you tell us a little bit about your winery and
I can.
What it's all about?
And I think a picture speaks 1,000 words. I was gonna do it this interview outside today, but it is hella windy, so we would not have made it. So I'm just gonna take a walk outside so you can see our view. But yeah, you can see we're in an old airplane hangar on an old Naval Air Base. It's a big funky warehouse. And yeah, we are an urban winery. My dad was sort of like the grandfather of urban wineries. Rosenblum was the first urban winery back in 1975, the first prohibition urban winery. So this is our beautiful view of San Francisco.
Oh, I want to go out there.
This would normally be chock full of people if it wasn't shelter in place, but
that looks amazing.
That's my real fake Zoom background. It's a real thing. And it looks like the wind is blowing my internet connection away. Let me get back inside.
Right. Well, and so when things are, quote unquote normal, you have events and stuff out there, people gathering and music and things like that, or?
Yeah, tons of like food truck events. We'll get things where we have like 20 food trucks pull up and we get a DJ and sell wine by the glass, and it just turns into a big dance party. It's a lot of fun.
Gosh, that sounds like heaven.
And lots of weddings. I got married here. I got married right in front of Beyonce.
Bless. Actually, I walked down the aisle to Halo by Beyonce, so I can relate to that.
I love
wanting
that.
to have Queen Bee with you on your day.
Yeah.
So wait, what was the question I was going to ask you about this?
Well, let me segue into our painting.
The painting. Oh yes, that's yes. Okay, I saw it out of the corner of my eye and I was like, I have to ask her about this.
Yes. So this is the painting that, let me see, let me get so you can see it. There you go. So when we first, this angle is so weird. There we go. When we first when the base first decommissioned, I was in high school. Let me see if I can get a better. No, I think that's about as good as it gets. I was in high school when the base decommissioned, and so we would come out here urban exploring, and the Navy really kind of like took what they wanted out of the buildings and then left everything else. So I actually found this painting. Um, and it is sort of the ultimate manifestation. It's women making wine, and it actually hung in the mess hall here on the base from 1944 until 1997 when the base decommissioned. And people have started bringing us all of this super cool paraphernalia. So like this is, let's see if you guys can see it with the reflection on the glass. This is the invitation to Christmas dinner, 1944.
Oh my gosh.
Painting is on the cover of the invitation. Like there's just so much history. And this painting hung in the mess hall from, like I said, 1944 until 1997 when the base decommissioned. And so, you know, for the Navy to leave it and for us to find it, it was really special and just sort of, like I said, the ultimate manifestation. It's women making wine. Like how random is that? How
you were like blessed and anointed in the space.
Yes, exactly.
And also so cool to like be a part of like of the history of that, of the community and of the city and of the, you know, what was going on at the space. Like it's so layered.
It is so layered. And, you know, I've seen, you know, older gentlemen who saw this painting every day of their life in the mess hall, you know, like bust a tear when they see it, because it was part of a whole different life that they led, you know. Definitely some cool stories behind it. There's a lot of history here for sure.
Wow. So being that you're an urban winery, like, and as I said, most people kind of think of this romantic view of, you know, being in the vines and picking grapes, and that's not what you're about, but it gives you so many advantages in terms of being able to utilize tons of different varieties of grapes.
Totally.
So can you talk about that and talk about, what, you know, how that all works?
Yeah. So, you know, the first vintage, I definitely, I was raised on making Zinfandel because that's sort of what my dad did. He's known for Old Vine Zinfandel. And so I definitely did a lot of that. But then I just started getting interested in like, what else is there? You know, like what else is out there? And so initially it was like Cab Franc. I got to find Cab Franc. I love Cab Franc. And then from Cab Franc, I got into sort of like more savory varietals, like Italian stuff. And so now, you know, I make 42 different wines, some of which are really, I mean, it's from like the normal thing that you would like Cabernet, Chardonnay, all the way into super esoterica, like Tiraldigo and Chili Jolo and Sagrantino and Greco, like all of these different things. And basically when I get really excited about a wine, I get on my phone and I start calling growers. I'm like, Diego, do you know a guy who has Chili Jolo? He goes, I do know a guy that has Chili Jolo. Or no, I don't know who's growing Tiraldigo, but I know a guy who probably knows a guy growing Tiraldigo. And it's so intertwined that I'm usually able to find whatever weird varietal I'm looking for. It's unique if I'm not able to find it, but I do have to go looking. It's like shopping at Ross, right? Like you're going to find some stuff, but you got to look.
And do most of your grapes come from California, or are you sourcing them from all over the country, all over the world?
Right now, all of them come from California, and I'm going to open this other bottle right now. This is the other rosé. Both are made from Grenache and Cunois.
And is the sparkling that you poured at the beginning of our interview, is that the one that we were pouring in the Rosé Mansion in 2018?
Yes, baby.
I love that. I love that one. I remember it well.
Thank you. Well, cheers.
Yes. Here, cheers.
Yeah, so just, you know, whatever I get excited about, I try to find it, and I try to drink samples ad nauseum. I mean, like, honestly, like, I don't know if you guys have Grocery Outlet in New York, but Grocery Outlet in California is this like grocery retailer outlet. So it's like really cheap stuff, but they have a pretty great wine selection. And you can go and get a case of something for $80. And so that's what I would start doing with all of these weird varietals is I'd go to grocery outlet and look for something I've never heard of before, and then try it, and then start Googling it, and then just, like do more research, and then buy like a really nice bottle of it. And just so to get like a range of what this grape can accomplish. And then that would give me the frame of reference. Because a lot of people are like, so you just made wine from grapes you've never heard of? How'd you know it was going to turn out well? It's like, well, I didn't, but I tasted the grapes. And if the grapes taste good, that's a really good indication that the wine is going to be a good wine at the end.
Yeah, that's so interesting because the ones that you were just rattling off that were sort of the more obscure, I have never even heard of. I've never even heard Tyler talk about those. And so I'm like, oh my God, I have to go out and find all of these things. It's so interesting because I tend to like things that are a little bit more niche, I think.
Yeah, well, and I think that's something about, our generation. I think millennials are like, hey, we like Chardonnay. I mean, honestly, I probably drink more Chardonnay than anything, but I think, finding out what else is there and then being able to bring that bottle of Chili Jolo to your homie's house, right? And be like, this is Chili Jolo. It comes from this region in Italy and this, and this. And it's a conversation starter. And then you and that friend might get really obsessed with Chili Jolo or, however it goes down. And it's just, it's exciting. Wine is exciting, and finding out new things. I think curious people like finding out new things, right? So that's that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we have been finding that's been so fun in quarantine is that we're doing these Wine Wednesdays where we have, just people come, show up, show us your bottle, we'll talk about it. And the amount of people who just really want to learn, we didn't expect that necessarily. And I think it is because it's a way for people to come together. Like I remember the first time I went to my ex-boyfriend's house for like Thanksgiving, and I was like, what do I bring? What do I bring? And I found out about like Gewürztraminer.
Yes.
And they were like, this is a good Thanksgiving wine. So I brought it and I felt so fancy because I was like, no one's going to know what this is, even though, it wasn't that obscure. But I remember it being like a big deal to me and I wanted to talk about it and I wanted to share. So I think that that's really, more than just like getting drunk and hanging out. It's a way for people to tell stories and learn.
Bingo. I mean, wine it's such an exciting, I guess you'd call it like an exciting catalyst to storytelling, right? Like, because there's so many interesting stories. I mean, there's a lot of, I don't want to call them soulless wines, but just wines that have been mass produced. And, I can't tell you my biggest pet peeve, if you flip a bottle over and there's no information, just produced and bottled by, it's like, the winemaker spent a year making this wine. You didn't have a single word to say about it. Like, those are wines that they're probably fine. But if you find, a wine that has like a short essay on the back label, like most of mine do, I'm literally like, whatever I have to say about the wine, I'm printing on the wine bottle, because I don't necessarily think you're going to, not you, but whomever is going to take the time to go on the website, print out the tech note, which is even more involved. I mean, literally. But if you can read the back of my bottle and feel well informed about the story of the winery or the story of the wine, then that's a good start, right?
Yeah, I love that, because then again, it sort of speaks to the whole creative process and the fact that this is your art and this is something that takes time. You can't just, it's not like you turn on a tap and it comes out. This takes time, it takes age, it takes a lot of resources. And so to have it treated in that reverent way by saying something about it, I think is really important. I think it's very cool.
Important. And, people don't realize, like, the enemy of air, or the enemy of wine when you're making wine, is air. Like, when you're in, like, air's everywhere. What do you do? Right. So like, there's definitely measures that people have no idea about, like making sure the wine constantly has a blanket of gas that's heavier than air, like argon or nitrogen, or something that's going to sit on top of the wine and separate the wine from the air, because otherwise the wine can start to oxidize. And you really want the wine to be bottled in sort of a reductive environment so that it's safe. We do a nitrogen drip on top so that by the time you open this bottle of wine, That's really the first time the wine's being exposed to air, except for very intentional micro-oxygenation that I'm doing during fermentation, because yeast likes a little bit of air, but then once it's done fermenting, you don't want air to touch the wine. So there's like so many different nuances, and you can give the same grapes to 10 different winemakers and tell them, make it this way, this is the recipe. Every single wine's going to come out differently because there's all these little nuances. Like somebody might use argon, somebody might use CO2, somebody might use nitrogen, somebody, you know, even if you ask people to use the same yeast, you will still have a different result.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So I saw a video from when Morgan and Tyler went to visit you, and Morgan is punching down the grapes.
Yeah.
And it just harkened back to this very sort of analog, hands-on process that I wasn't really aware was still present in a winery like yours, where it's, I mean, you make so many varieties of wine. You're obviously big. And you're not, you know, you're in the city. So can you talk a little bit about incorporating those more hands-on processes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think handmade wine is what gives wine the soul. I mean, they say the soul of the winemaker is in every bottle of wine, right? And for me, I always took the philosophy at Ridge very seriously. So Ridge Winery, they're, you know, like pre-industrial winemaking. That's their concept. So like a lot of their stuff is gravity feed, not mechanized, this, that, and the other thing. And I do use some machines, like I do use a crusher occasionally. I do have a press, but as far as like doing punch downs, that's the process where you interact with the grapes 2 to 3 times a day, because you inoculate the grapes with yeast, or some people don't. There's naturally occurring yeast on the grapes. It really depends on the site though, and we could talk for an hour about this. I won't, but you know, because certain sites there's too much humidity, there's just the weather isn't correct. If you have an ideal site with ideal native flora, totally do a native fermentation. But if you have a site where it's maybe been a little bit of a like dicey weather year or something like that, you want to inoculate if you don't want acetobacters or you don't want any other factors to creep into your wine that cause off notes. So I will inoculate most of my wines. Some I don't. But after you pitch the yeast in there, there's a little bit of a lag phase. So basically I'll punch down the grapes, sometimes with my hands, sometimes with that metal tool. But everything has to be sanitized first, obviously. You have to be so clean when you're making wine. And then I let the yeast sort of sit on top, and I pour the yeast in like a spiral, like a circle, like an infinity circle. I feel like the yeast really likes that vibe of like being together and wholesome. And so it starts doing its thing, and it grows and it grows. And then all of a sudden it starts eating all the sugar. And so once the yeast starts eating all of the sugar in the grape bins, then it's got a really active fermentation. It's got tons of energy, and it needs to burn that energy off a little bit. So doing these punch downs, you're saturating the cap of the grapes, and you want to keep the cap, which is the top layer. You want to keep the top layer of the grapes saturated. Otherwise, you can get something called VA, or volatile acidity, or basically vinegar. And so if you smell a wine that smells like vinegar, it has high VA, and some people like that, but then there's a legal level of VA, and then there's like an illegal level of VA where your wine is literally starting to turn to vinegar.
Mm-hmm.
That's not good. That doesn't taste good. But so you want to keep this cap saturated multiple times per day. And the CO2 is being produced from the fermentation. So the yeast is eating the sugar in the grapes, and it's producing the byproduct of CO2 and alcohol. But CO2 is the thing that's responsible for pushing that cap up to the top. So usually about 3 times per day during the very active phase of fermentation, we got to push it down and saturate it and make sure this cap is staying wet. And like, it really depends on the harvest. Like last year we did a pretty small harvest. We made about 8,000 cases of wine. Compared to like 2016, we did about 15,000 cases of wine. Even though we have a big space, we're still a relatively considered a small winery. But at some points, you know, sometimes you have 500 punch downs to do per day. And so you just got to do it.
Get those guns working.
Oh man, girl, yes.
That's so, I could listen to you talk for hours and hours. Okay, so I guess a good way to maybe finish this up, because even though I would love to talk to you all day, we can
Yeah, we
only
need
give,
30 minutes. I know. And you're
yeah,
going to edit this down to 5 minutes. Good luck, dude.
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna try. We'll give you 8. We'll see. But I guess like what I want to know is like, what are you working on right now? What are you excited about? What are you drinking? Like,
Sure.
talk to me
Um,
about that.
Getting ready for a bottling coming up. I made a wine in the style. It's called La Piquette, and this is something that's actually a style of wine that I didn't know. I just thought it was something that I did, and so it's basically like it's fermented pumice. So the pumice is after you've pressed the juice out of the like white grapes. Normally, you would just compost that, right? But instead, I pour yeast over the top of the pressed grapes and put a lid over it and let it sit for a couple of days. And it starts fermenting and the skins soften. And because you're really fermenting the skins of the grape at that point, then you press it and you get orange wine, right? So that's how you make orange wine. It's skin contact white wine. But this style of piquette it's basically made from compost. It's made from stuff that you were gonna get rid of. I wanted to call it garbage wine, but that doesn't have a real sexy ring to it.
But I think that could really play in a lot of markets where people
Right?
would be into that, garbage wine. And it's such a great use of, like, again, everybody's thinking sustainability. Let's move
Yeah,
from away from waste. So I think that's so cool. We
yeah.
have also had so many questions on our Wine Wednesday about the orange wine. People are extremely interested in this.
It's big. It's a big thing. And frankly, it's sort of like, I feel like it's the new pet nat, right? Like last year, everybody's like, pet nat. And everybody's like, Paquette, Paquette. And frankly, a lot of the wineries in the Finger Lakes and in New York, they're big into Paquette right now. So definitely when we get off, Google Paquette. I'm sure you'll see a bunch of cool stuff. Um, the gals at Old Westminster, I know they're doing something. So lots of fun stuff on the market, but I say that's a fun new one to experiment with. And my back label copy, what does it say? It says, this wine is weird and lighthearted, so don't take yourself too seriously while drinking this super fun orange wine.
That is like a perfect encapsulation of how Rosé Mansion and we all feel about wine. Get weird, drink what
Get,
you like, have fun, don't take it too
yeah.
seriously.
Don't take it too seriously. Like I think Morgan and Tyler sort of hit the nail on the head with one of their first things back in like what 2009, second glass, right? Like trying to introduce millennials in our generation to have a second glass of wine. So I love Morgan and Tyler. I could just talk about them all day. They're wonderful, wonderful people. We bonded over tacos initially, which feels so appropriate.
Yeah, that sounds, that tracks. That sounds very on brand. Oh my God, so much great content. Thank you so much for doing
Thank you,
this.
Elizabeth. This is super fun.